Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. You know, the last couple of weeks I've really been struggling to come up with topics of conversation to talk about in Mingles with Jingles. Haven't had that problem this week. Quite the opposite. I'm not sure I'm going to have enough time to talk about everything that needs talking about this week. Although maybe it would help matters if I just got to the point for a change. Nah, never going to happen. And the first thing this week that we need to talk about is this week's sponsor, Displate. Long-time viewers of the channel may be aware that I've accumulated a certain amount of stuff over the years. The house is liberally covered in comic book, TV, movie and video game memorabilia, including a whole bunch of posters, all of which are framed and properly mounted, and these canvas prints on wooden frames like this. And they're great, but they are expensive and surprisingly tricky to mount on the walls. Traditional posters are obviously a lot cheaper and a lot easier, unless you want them to last longer than 6 months, in which case you have to frame them, and then suddenly they are actually kind of expensive and they're equally tricky to mount on the walls. So when Displate came through with this offer, it was a bit of a no-brainer. I'd always been kind of skeptical about Displate in the past, and then I got my hands on some. Displate are, I'm sure you're all aware, metal posters, which obviously makes them more expensive than paper posters, until you figure in the added cost of properly framing a paper poster and arranging to get it onto the wall straight in a way that isn't going to ruin the wall behind it. And then suddenly Displate starts looking kind of competitive, especially compared to those canvas prints mounted on wooden frames, which are even more expensive and even trickier to mount on a wall. And on top of that, Displate have just introduced something that no canvas or paper print can possibly compete with. Their new texture finishing. A beautiful textured finish to the surface that matches the contours of the art on the plate. And when it comes to getting your display of choice onto the wall where you can actually admire it, you don't have to worry about buying frames or sorting out hammers, nails, pins or anything else, because every Displate comes with its own magnetic mounting solution. Put your backing paper onto the wall, attach the supplied magnet to the backing paper. Do that twice, depending on the size of your Displate, and then, well, it's a metal poster. It just sticks to the magnets. And if it's not on straight first time, you can adjust it in seconds because it's just magnetized. It really is as simple as that. And if you get your Displate using my link by going to displate.com/@mightyjingles, where your discount will automatically be applied at the checkout, or just use the code MIGHTYJINGLES and you'll get 25% off one Displate and 35% off if you order 2 or more. At the very least, click the link in the description and go and have yourself a browse on the Displate web store, because I guarantee you're going to see something that you like the look of. So, anyway, on with what's what. Where to start? Let's get the old medical stuff out of the way first. So you might recall, about a month ago now, as part of my post-bowel cancer surgery treatment, a year after the surgery, I'm supposed to get checked again just to make sure it hasn't come back. And so about a month ago, I went to the hospital for a CT scan. Then a week after that, I had a heart attack. But the CT scan's what's important here, because that's checking for a reoccurrence of the bowel cancer. And I had the scan about a month ago, and I still haven't had the results. Nobody's contacted me to let me know whether or not I'm going to live or die, which is kind of worrying. I'm also supposed to have a colonoscopy within a couple of weeks of the CT scan. The CT scan was a month ago. I don't even have an appointment for a colonoscopy yet. And there's a 6 to 7 week waiting list for a colonoscopy, unless it's an emergency. So, yeah, this isn't good. I spent a couple of days last week phoning the hospital, trying to find out what the hell's going on. The key word here being trying, because the only listed phone number for the colorectal department is the colorectal stoma care department, and I haven't had a stoma fitted. So it took me the best part of a day just to find the correct department to call. And then when I called what was supposed to be the correct department, the person on the other end of the phone couldn't help me and directed me to another number, which I called, and it rang and rang and rang for 20 minutes with nobody picking up. So I waited half an hour, called again, same result. I started looking through my old treatment notes, and I actually found the name of the surgeon who performed the successful surgery. and I found his number, and I called that. Nobody picked that one up either. So I spent a couple of days basically not talking to anybody at the hospital, and I still don't know whether or not I can expect to live for another year. So I guess I'll just keep trying. I don't know what else to do. Maybe if I get my doctor involved. I'll give that a try. Monday, well, that's today. If you're watching this episode on the day it gets published, I'll pop over to the doctor's surgery and say, help. I'd really like to know whether or not I need to start looking at foster parents for my cats, or can I expect to actually live another year? Any help would be appreciated. Thank you. I tell you, it's been really stressful. I picked a really bad time to quit smoking. And I have quit, by the way. Like I said, after the heart attack, I stopped smoking. And I haven't had a cigarette since, so in about a month now. Which is really, really good. But well, let me just put it this way. I don't feel like a non-smoker. I just feel like a smoker who isn't smoking and would really, really like a cigarette. Especially after being on the phone to the hospital with nobody picking up for half an hour. It's really stressful. And who knows? Maybe when I do eventually get the results of the CT scan, I'll find out that it was just a waste of time quitting smoking. And I may as well start again and enjoy whatever time I have left. Like I said, it would just be nice to know. So anyway, wish me luck. Moving on, what's next? Oh, so have you heard Lesta Studios are apparently in the shit. And not because they've actually done anything wrong, but well, that's never stopped the Russian justice system before, has it? So here's what's been going on. First, a bit of context. Back in, 2022, really was that long ago, when Russia invaded Ukraine, again, Wargaming.net, the creators and owners of World of Tanks, World of Warplanes, and World of Warships, ceased all operations in Belarus and Russia as a result. They pulled out completely. I mean, they've been based in Cyprus for years anyway, but they still had a lot of assets in Belarus and Russia. They shut all of those down. They shut down their offices in Belarus, in Minsk, and they handed the keys, effectively, for the Russian versions of all of their games to Lesta Studios, who were the developers, at the time owned by Wargaming, of World of Warships. So at that point, Lesta Studio became their own thing again and took ownership of all of Wargaming's products in the Russian market. And Wargaming.net retained ownership and development of all of their stuff everywhere other than in Russia. Yeah. So what that meant in the intervening 3 years since it happened was the Russian version of World of Warships is actually kind of different to, well, the version that we play everywhere else, because Lesta continued to develop it themselves without being told what to do and how to do it by Wargaming. Now, I have no personal opinion on this myself. I've never actually played the Russian versions of World of Tanks or World of Warships, but there are plenty of people who have, and the consensus generally seems to be that free of Wargaming's influence, with Lesta developing and operating the games themselves, they're actually, again, I can't speak to this personally, but a lot of people consider that the Lesta versions of World of Tanks and World of Warships are superior to the versions that we've been playing in the 3 years since Russia invaded Ukraine, again, and Wargaming.net handed the keys for the Russian versions of the games over to Lesta Studios. Going back to 2022, however, shortly after divesting themselves of all of their Russian properties, Wargaming.net then embarked on a bit of a sort of PR damage limitation exercise. Because even though Wargaming has never actually been a Russian company, they've always been thought of as a Russian company. And honestly, as a Belarusian company, is not really that much of a difference. So they embarked on a whole bunch of humanitarian fundraising activities. They raised millions of dollars for humanitarian purposes in Ukraine. So, I mean, nobody's complaining about this. Well, actually, somebody is. The Russian Justice Ministry is complaining about this, and they're holding Lesta Studios responsible. Just to give a little bit of context here, and possibly also to explain the motivation behind the Russian Justice Ministry's seizure of all of Lesta Studios' assets, including the personal bank accounts of their owners. Running Wargaming's titles in Russia has been very profitable for Lesta Studios. They have been making bank hand over fist. It has been extremely profitable for them. And then 3 years after the split, they are now being held accountable for the humanitarian fundraising that Wargaming have been doing after going their separate way from Lesta in Ukraine. And it's being called extremist activity. So they're effectively being held under the Russian equivalent of the Terrorism Act because of what the company that they used to be owned by have been doing in Ukraine since Russia invaded in 2022. And you will not, well, you probably will believe because it's Russia, but some of the evidence that's being cited in this lawsuit to support the charge of extremist activity by Lesta Studios, they're actually citing the headlines of news articles as evidence. And one of the news articles cited in the lawsuit against Lesta Studio is Wargaming launches charity project with Ukrainian content in its games to raise money for ambulances. This is like Epic suing Apple because Bill Gates is giving all of his money away to charity. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? Well, yes, it is ridiculous. I mean, of course it's ridiculous. But ridiculous or not, the lawsuit was filed. The Russian courts have seized all of Lesta Studios' assets, and it wouldn't surprise me if a year or two down the line, somebody fairly high up in the Russian Justice Ministry suddenly finds themselves receiving the gift of a $300 million house from their extremely generous and inexplicably suddenly also extremely wealthy 6-year-old daughter. Speaking of Apple and Epic, have you heard the news about the court decision that was handed down in the US? Let's just say it went in Epic's favour. Epic have basically gotten everything that they've been suing Apple for, in the USA at least, over the course of, the last 5 years now. It's been going on a while. Epic were upset that every time somebody made a purchase in Fortnite, it had to go through Apple Pay, and Apple therefore took a 30% cut. And, understandably upset. But those were the terms of the agreement that Epic signed with Apple. And Epic, they'll never admit to it. Tim Sweeney will never come out and say this is exactly what we did, but this is basically exactly what they did. They engineered a situation where Apple would have no choice but to kick Fortnite off the Apple Store by introducing a payment option in Fortnite that allowed you to pay Epic directly rather than going through Apple. So if you wanted to pay for anything in Fortnite, you'd be presented with these two options. First, there was the Apple option, which was 30% more expensive than the just pay us directly option. And this is expressly against the terms and conditions that Epic had agreed to when they launched Fortnite on the Apple Play Store. And they knew that Apple would have no choice but to kick Fortnite off the store, which Apple did. And then literally the next day, Epic's lawsuit was ready to go, complete with the social media campaign. We're expected to believe that they threw all this together in 24 hours. No. They engineered the situation, it happened, and off they went. They hit the ground running, lawsuit in the courts, social media campaign up and running, trying to drum up support and sympathy for their cause. And whether you think that Apple were in the wrong, or Epic were in the wrong, or whatever, honestly, I really didn't care. I mean, technically, legally, Epic were wrong. Morally, were they right? You know what? I really didn't care either way. I was just sitting back, munching the popcorn, and enjoying the show of two evil mega corporations taking it out on each other for a change instead of us. So anyway, to cut an extremely long story short, in 2021, the judge in the case rejected Epic's claim that Apple was running a monopoly. So, point to Apple. But the judge did find that Apple was stopping developers from giving users alternative payment options in violation of California's competition rules. And she then ordered Apple to make changes that would help game developers steer their customers to cheaper payment options outside of Apple's ecosystem. So, point to Epic. It's more or less exactly what they raised the lawsuit for in the first place. What the 2021 court ruling effectively did, as well as ordering Apple to actually allow developers to give their customers the option of making payments not through Apple, and so Apple weren't getting the 30% cut, but it also ordered them to refrain from what's known as anti-steering activities, or in other words, making it harder for developers to tell the users to make purchases outside of the app. And of course, Apple fully complied with this court order. No, of course they didn't. They're Apple. They're evil. Apple made it as difficult as possible. Well, first they made it as easy as possible for you to make in-game purchases that Apple would take a 30% cut from. You just said, oh, I want to buy that, and present it with a pay now button. But if you wanted to pay and not get charged an extra 30% that was going into Apple's pockets, you had to go through so many hoops. The actual act of paying somebody other than Apple was buried beneath so many click here to proceed, please check here to acknowledge different screens before you could actually do anything other than pay Apple. They were doing exactly what they had been specifically ordered not to do by the court. And then, to make matters worse, if you did somehow manage to persist and navigate your way through all of the deliberately obtuse systems that Apple had put in place in order to prevent people from actually paying anybody other than Apple, if you did manage to get through it and pay the developer directly at what was usually a 30% reduced cost, Apple started charging the developer fees for the privilege. Needless to say, Epic wasn't happy, and neither was the judge. The judge was extremely unhappy. Judge Yvonne Gonzalez Rogers not only agreed with Epic Games, but also found that Apple's Vice President of Finance, Alex Roman, had lied under oath and referred the matter to the federal prosecutor for potential criminal investigation. Because it has been found, as a matter of fact in law, that an Apple Vice President lied to the court while under oath. Now, realistically, I realise that it is extremely unlikely that Apple's Vice President of Finance, Alex Roman, is going to jail over this. But the chances are not zero. Oh, and that really made my day. But while we're on the subject of Epic and Tim Sweeney, they're not getting away scot-free this week either. Obviously, Epic's boss, Tim Sweeney's got a lot to be happy about in the last couple of weeks, especially as a result of this court ruling in the Epic versus Apple case, but he's also being praised for his honesty regarding the Epic Games Store. In an interview, he said, one of the reasons that people characterise the Epic Games launcher as clunky is because the Epic Games launcher is clunky. Which seems like a refreshingly honest take from a corporate CEO. But hold on to that thought. Because yeah, I mean the Epic Games Store and launcher in general is kind of bad. But I'm not holding my breath waiting for it to get any better. Because there are certain things about it. I mean, there may be small changes. There may be iterative improvements. But the most important things about the Epic Games Store, I don't think are ever going to improve. And it's not because Tim Sweeney's being honest all of a sudden. The Epic Games Store was released in 2018 as a direct competitor to Steam. Yes, I know, stop laughing. Clearly that hasn't happened. But when it launched, it was really bad. And I don't just mean because of the limited selection of games compared to Steam. I mean, that was always going to be obvious. And I don't just mean because of all of the Epic Games Store exclusives that Epic used all of that Fortnite money to basically bribe developers to have their games be exclusive to the Epic Game Store for the first year. And I don't hold it against the developers. Game development is a very tough business. Most studios fail. Epic at the time were offering an extremely nice carrot. I don't blame any developers who took advantage of the offer. It did generate a lot of negative PR for Epic. In fact, there are a lot of people who still hold a grudge against Epic to this day and will refuse, just out of principle, to buy anything on the Epic Game Store. So all of these were factors, but I'm not referring to any of this when I'm saying that the Epic launcher and the Game Store were kind of bad. The functionality was just not there. It didn't launch with a shopping cart. If you want, I mean, let's not forget, it was called the Epic Games Store. It was a place where you were supposed to go that wasn't Steam to buy games. But the actual process of buying the games was as awkward and clunky as it could possibly be. They didn't even have a shopping cart. So this week, Tim Sweeney's coming out and saying, yep, the Epic Game Launcher and Store has a reputation for being clunky, and that's because it's clunky, and everybody's praising him for his honesty. Here's the thing. When the store was released, it didn't have a shopping cart, a basic level of functionality. We're now 7 years later, and guess what? The Epic Games Store still doesn't have a shopping cart. If you've been operating your business for 7 years and it still doesn't have a shopping cart, I could set up a storefront using commercially available software and have it running with a shopping cart today, but the Epic Game Store doesn't. That's not an accident. They are doing that on purpose. Why would they be doing that? Well, I don't know for sure, but I can hazard a guess. Now, call me a wizened old cynic if you must, but, actually, perfect example. So at the moment, Electronic Arts are running big giveaways on their most recent PC Star Wars titles. So games like Jedi Survivor, Jedi Outcast, Battlefront, and so on and so on. You can get them until, I think, the 15th of May on Steam at 80 or 85% discounts. So you think, oh, I want to take advantage of this. So you hop over to Steam, you've got your shopping list of recent Star Wars titles that you want to buy from Electronic Arts, and you go, that one, add them to the cart, pay for them, install, start playing. You can't do that on the Epic Game Store. You can go, okay, Star Wars Jedi Outcast, that one, buy now. You pay for it, maybe you start it downloading in the background, and then you have to go back to the store page to find the other discounted Star Wars games that you went there to get in the first place. And every time you do it, you end up back at the store page being presented with all of the other stuff that the Epic Game Store has going on at the time. And this is a proven sales tactic. It works. It's the reason why, if you want to get the daily free bonus in World of Warships, for example, you first have to log into World of Warships, and then the very first thing that you have to do is go into the shop to claim your daily free bonus, because they can't sell you anything if you're not logging into the game. And they still can't sell you anything if you are logging into the game, but you're not going into the shop. It's the exact same reason why Epic give away a free game or a heavily discounted game every month. It's not because they're feeling generous, it's because they can't sell you anything if you're not logging into the Epic Games Store. And that is why there is no shopping cart in the Epic Games Store. They can't sell you anything unless you're sitting there staring at the store screen. So when Tim Sweeney says, yes, we know that the Epic Store is very clunky and it's something that we need to improve, it only sounds like he's being honest, and he definitely shouldn't be getting praised for it, because he knows exactly why the Epic Game Store is as clunky as it is. And it has everything to do with making money and absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with a decent user experience. Speaking of decent user experiences, Nintendo, no strangers to lawsuits, Nintendo have just declared that they have the right, and I'm not making this up, they have the right to brick your Switch if they think you're messing around with it. If ever you needed a monthly reminder of just how great it is to be a member of the PC gaming master race, you can always rely on Nintendo. So you know how you buy a PC and you're free to add, modify or remove whatever hardware you like from it. In fact, you're probably actually expected to. Same goes with the software that you install on the PC. You can install whatever operating system you like. You can modify the code of whatever software is installed. It's your PC, you can do what you want with it. Well, Nintendo doesn't appear to think that anybody who buys a Switch from them enjoys the same rights. Nintendo seem to think that after you've handed over a couple of $100 for a Switch, that all you've actually done is lease it from them. The Switch remains Nintendo's property, and they retain the right to, well, basically render it unusable if they think it's necessary. This is functionally the equivalent of Microsoft declaring that they have the right to brick your PC if you think about installing alternative operating systems. Windows has detected that you are attempting to install Linux. Your computer will now shut down permanently. Or, possibly more likely, Windows has detected that you still haven't upgraded to Windows 11. Your PC is now going to be shut down permanently. I'm not saying that this is never going to happen. It is Microsoft. I'm just saying I think it's unlikely that they're going to be able to get away with it this year. On the other hand, if you're thinking of buying a Nintendo Switch 2, I'm saying that it's unlikely that it is not going to happen this year, to some unfortunate bugger. And I'd like to finish this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles by talking about passwords. And no, this isn't a sponsorship for NordVPN, but I probably should use it as a sponsorship for NordVPN the next time they offer. Hive Systems, a cybersecurity company, just put out a report. It's 2025 password table. So basically every year, this company puts together a system of the current latest gen PC tech and tries to see how long it would take that tech to brute force its way through a bunch of passwords. This Sears system consists of tech built around 12 RTX 5090s. There are various different reasons why they chose that specification, which I'm not going to go into, but that's the system that they've been trying to brute force passwords with, and they just published their results. So if you have a password that consists of up to 8 characters, and they're all numbers, this system will guess your password instantly. If you have a password that consists of up to 5 lowercase letters, this system will guess your password instantly. If you have a password that consists of 4 numbers, upper and lowercase letters and symbols, this system will guess your password instantly. Now, I say guess your password. It's not guessing the password. It's just running through every possible combination of passwords based on the complexity of whatever it is that you've chosen. So whether that's 8 numbers, it'll instantly guess it. Whether it's 5 lowercase letters, it will instantly guess it. Any combination of 4 numbers, upper and lowercase letters or symbols, the length of time that it would take this system to run through every possible combination of factors is so short that it's effectively instantaneous. So that's kind of scary. That's just the level of power that modern computational technology is at. But there is good news. Going back to the easiest sequence for this system to run through, just a bunch of numbers only, right? With a password consisting of 8 numbers, this system would run through all possible combinations so quickly that it would effectively be instantaneous. If you were to up that to a password consisting of 10 numbers, it would take the same system up to a day to reach the correct password. If that was a string of 10 random lowercase letters, it would take that same system up to 40 years to find your password. If you were to make that upper and lowercase letters, a string of 10 random uppercase and lowercase letters, the same system that could instantly crack an 8-digit password would now take anything up to 41,000 years to get the same result. At the extreme end of the scale, if you have a password that consists of a random string of 18 numbers, upper and lowercase letters and symbols, this system would take 463 quadrillion years at most to guess your password. I mean, it might get lucky and it would just stumble across the correct combination in the first hour, but the chances are slim. So the good news is that while it is kind of scary just how powerful modern technology is, all you have to do is make your passwords just a little bit more complex and they're effectively unguessable. So on that bit of good news, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles or Jingles. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's given you something to talk about in the comments. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.